Well, hello out there, YouTube world. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Luke Burton or Lucas Burton, whichever you prefer. I work as a personal development coach and was a mental health therapist for that before that for about 21 years. And then I made a transition into doing coaching. So I do these videos on different types of topics or things I've worked with clients or working on myself with. Most of the things I've worked with clients I've also applied to myself as well. So hopefully it's helpful. Like and subscribe. And it helps me out a lot knowing some of the topics that are fun to talk about. You should be able to contact me through some of my info here. And if you have ideas for a video, happy to do it if it's something I actually have worked with or worked on myself with. All right. So today, interesting topic I find is about vulnerability. Right. So a lot of us will think about vulnerability. Well, my experience has been, I know when I was first figuring out what I meant to be vulnerable, I had all this big story inside my head. Well, if I'm vulnerable, I'm weak. I remember as a kid growing up, don't talk about your feelings, suppress that shit, keep it, sorry, keep that shit down there, don't let it out, because if you do, people are going to think you're weak. Well, is there some truth to that? Well, from different aspects or different ways that you may come out at that, I guess yes, right? How I look at vulnerability is really it's about being courageous and you're strong for yourself. Where I think the ideas of vulnerability, like especially with the male energy, and I'm sure it's the same with female energy, but if you're conditioned to not talk about how you feel or what you want, um, it's like those automatic negative thoughts, right? The more you do that, that becomes your response. That becomes how you deal with things. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So the more that you repress that, the more that you don't talk about how you're feeling or share how you're feeling, the easier it gets to do that and have an automatic response of like, no, I'm good, I'm fine. Yeah, no. Now, am I suggesting you go out and just talk about your feelings? No, I'm talking about when you decide to share how you're feeling with somebody that's either close to you, or that's a safe person for you to talk to, and who you decide who that is, right? There's no point in me telling you who to go talk to because I don't even know who you are, right? So, what I'm suggesting is that if you have that conditioning, and I call it conditioning because the more you condition yourself to respond in a way, the easier it gets. So, the devil you know is easier than the devil you don't. So, the things that you know are easier to do are easier than the things that you're just trying out. So, with vulnerability, there's that stigmatism. Like if you talk about how you feel, right, then you're weak. And I can understand that. If you're always talking about how you're feeling and never making any changes towards that, people may get a little tired of that. I know in my experience in my life, I would years ago I would talk about how I was feeling and not make any changes. Right? So is that really being vulnerable? I would say no, I wasn't really. Right? I was being more like talking a big but never starting. Talking but never starting. Talking but never doing. The thing with vulnerability that I found with myself is that when I realized that the more if I shared with a partner, right? Shared that I don't really, when you do this or I'm concerned about this, this is how I'm feeling. If I did that with the expectation that they'd be like, oh, like give your permission, like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, if you're thinking that's going to happen, like if you're doing that to get that, is that vulnerability? No, right? You're doing it based on an outcome, on an attachment to an outcome. Now, if you do the vulnerability, if you talk about how you're feeling with yourself, with somebody else, right? Not liking how things are going. I'm concerned about this. I understand why you would do that, but my fear and my concerns are this. and they respond with, well, you know what? I don't care what you think. And that can happen. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to people watching this, all kinds of people that's happened to. Now, your response to that, if it's, oh my God, I can't believe I shared that and they said this stuff to me, okay, so you're doing it based on an outcome. But if you do that and they respond that way and you're like, well, I really appreciate your feedback, but I still feel that same way. And I'm okay with your response. I'm okay that you don't agree with me or you don't believe me or you don't feel the same way. I'm okay with that. Right? You let go of that outcome. Right? You let it go. And people say, oh, how do you let it go? Well, you need to be more vulnerable to what you want. Right? It's okay to talk about what you want. It's okay to tell people what you need. You know, the more you repress that stuff, the more it comes out in different forms, different ways that are not so controllable, right? The more you push that down, the more that builds up. Right? The less you push down, the easier it is to manage that. It may seem weird or you might disagree, and that's okay. My experience has been with myself and with clients, the more that you share that, right? And I'm not suggesting you get on the local town bus and start telling everyone how you're feeling. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sharing that with someone that you care about and that you're willing to take the risk with, right? You're willing to do that. Because you could do this, and it's happened to me. I've shared with past partners that this is how I feel. And they said, well, I don't feel that way about you. And you know what? It stings a little. Well, it stings a lot. But you can live with that. Because you're not keeping yourself hidden. You're not keeping how you feel or how you're thinking hidden. You're not ashamed of it. You don't get that guilt feeling, right? You know, it's interesting about, vulnerability and guilt. Guilt can almost, in a lot of ways, is a choice, right? Like you do something and you feel guilty about it. We're choosing to feel guilty. You're doing that because that's what you need to do. Right? And I'm talking about healthy things. I'm not talking about abusive behaviors or anything like that. Like this isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. I'm talking about being vulnerable because the easier you find it, I shouldn't even say easier, it's a poor choice of words. The more you do it, the easier it gets. It's going to feel really uncomfortable at first. It's kind of like the saying, the devil you know is easier than the devil you don't. The things you know are easier to do than the new things you're trying out. But if you're doing it because you have this expectation or you want them to validate you, then you need to rethink that. If you're doing it because you need to share this is how you feel and you're okay with that, 100%. Right? If you're not basing yourself on the outcome of that conversation or that situation. And the more vulnerable you are, and then you become more vulnerable with yourself. It's okay with taking time for yourself, sharing with someone like, no, I'm just going to hang out with myself today. I'm going to do my own thing, right? Because some people will struggle with that. Like the whole idea of being vulnerable enough to say, no, I'm good. No, I don't want to do that. No, I'm just going to chill on my own. No, it sounds like a great time. You go out and have fun. I'm going to do this and be okay with that. Be vulnerable enough that they may not like what you have to say. And that's okay. Because you're doing it for you, right? You're doing it for your own sense of stability, your own sense of peace, right? Letting go of the outcome and being vulnerable with yourself can change things for you in a huge way, right? But if you don't believe me, that's okay. Give it a try. But if you're doing it because you're trying to convince someone to come back to you, you're kind of trying to convince someone to do what you want to do, may not work. It may work once or twice, but people may start to catch on, right? That really they're not really telling me They're telling me this because they want me to do this. But when you tell them what you need and what you want, and you're being genuine, you can manage that. You can manage the outcome of that. You're not so caught up in getting what you want. You're more caught up in actually releasing that, what you need to say, what you're feeling. Anyways, hope this was helpful in some way. Please like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Like I said before, shoot me an email if there's other things you want me to talk about. And thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and for you taking the time. Take care now. Bye-bye.